immediately helicopters went into action and were extracting the dead and injured. There was a huge amount of injuries.
Welcome to the Tales to Inspire podcast. Before we get started on this episode, I would like to invite you to our community so that you can hear more stories to inspire change within your life and positive change within the systems in which we live. All I want you to do is to click on the subscribe button. Your comments mean the world to us with anything that's resonated with you, and I absolutely love your support. I can't wait to go on this journey alongside you. Thank you so much for subscribing. Let's get into today's episode. Today we go into a deep dive with Jo Bradshaw.
I am Jo Bradshaw, and this is my Tale to Inspire.
So Jo Bradshaw, welcome to the Tales to Inspire podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on. This is going to be really special. I know it. We've already gone into so much and we've not even really pressed the record button so much. So do you want to introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and we'll go from there?
Sure. So my name is Jo Bradshaw, as you very kindly introduced me. So I say that I'm a former no-saying, height-hating, comfort-loving business advisor turned adventurer and Everest summiteer. It's quite a leap.
Let's just stop it there. I think we're good with that.
There's a big what happened in between. I live in Salisbury, which most people then go, the poisonings, rather than, wow, it has a beautiful cathedral and Stonehenge is nearby. It's like, it's the poisoning. So yeah, I live there, beautiful city. I have a dog called Monty who is at my feet, very chilled. And I'm a leadership development coach. I deliver talks on leadership and adventure and Everest and my journey through that. I lead expeditions overseas, mainly at altitude, because I love that style. Really, you really get to understand the person rather than staying in fancy hotels and doing a bit of walking. So yeah, lack of oxygen is good, in a good way. And also I teach Duke of Edinburgh students and assess to bronze, silver and gold levels of the award. And I love it. Yeah,
right,
so
there's lots to get to.
There's quite a lot in there, isn't there?
So let's go to the beginning.
Yeah.
So family background, growing up, what was it like being Jo Bradshaw as a child?
Wow. So I'm very fortunate. My parents outdoorsy, but we were very much more on the water. So my parents met when they were sailing down in West Wittering. My father used to fly Spitfires at the very end, just after the Second World War. And my mum used to be an occupational therapist and worked her way around the world when actually you boated around the world rather than flew. And we grew up in Cambridgeshire. My brother is slightly older than me. We both went to boarding school very young. In the same grounds, and then we went to boarding school, secondary school separately. And my brother then went to become a Harrier jump jet pilot, and I wanted to work with horses. So completely different. So he was very academic. I was probably I was less academic. But from the age of probably 6, I knew that that's all I wanted to do. And that's what I thought my life was going to be. I thought I was going to work with horses all my life and marry a farmer or a farrier and have 2.4 kids and lots of, horses, donkeys, dogs, a few children. And my life has turned out very differently.
How did you feel about your parents? I don't know whether they sent you or you felt like they sent you to boarding school, and how did you feel about that process?
I think because that's what they had done, so it was kind of normal. So both mum and dad had been to boarding school as well, and it doesn't mean we're super rich. I think there's this thing about boarding school that you have to be super rich, and it's how they spent their money. We didn't go on fancy holidays, we didn't have fancy cars. Or a fancy house. Their earnings went into our education, and it was really interesting because I know my brother didn't want to go to begin with but loved it. I really wanted to go and then hated it. And I was bullied quite a lot. I was a sort of little chubby kid, quite ginger, and yeah, was bullied for 10 years through school. So it wasn't a particularly pleasant experience.
And you couldn't, being at boarding school, you couldn't even get away
from it. No, you can't get away from it. And I sort of hid it a bit from my parents because I knew that I was in a fortunate position to be at a good school and gain a good education. All I wanted to be actually was with my parents. And I feel like I've sort of missed out of 10 years of being with them. And of course we were home during the holidays, and that was a really good time. And we lived a sort of quite free, I think back in the 70s and 80s, it was a much freer environment. You know, I remember when my brother and I used to go out biking when we were sort of in our formative years. We used to go out with a couple of friends in the village, and we used to be out on our bikes all day, no helmet, you know, a glass bottle of juice and a honey sandwich. Yeah. See you later. And I went back to that village a couple of years ago, and I drove down the lanes thinking, God, you would never cycle down these lanes now. And I know there's so many more cars and it's all different. But we lived a very free existence when we were at home. And Mum and Dad, you know, we used to go, my grandmother used to live on the south coast, so we went down to hers for holidays and we're always in the water. So it was a real water baby, actually. So when I started mountaineering, the family were a bit, oh, where has that come from? Because there's nobody in our family that's ever done that. Yeah, so I had a really good upbringing, and I really appreciate my upbringing. I just didn't appreciate school.
So how did you get?
And I did well
over that.
Over that.
Did you get through?
Well, I became very defensive and quite insular. Yeah, and it was interesting because at prep school I was made head of house, and at secondary school I was head of house as well. So the teachers obviously saw something in me. But I was kind of always waiting for something to happen, something bad to happen. So I think I was always a little bit on edge and quite defensive. And that has taken me a long time to work through and to understand that not everybody is like that. And I remember on Everest, actually, particularly in 2016, I was back in that place. Everest is a very weird place to be, and there was quite a lot of bullying and belittling, and I just went straight back into that being at school zone, and I shut down a bit, and I was like, right, I haven't come to the mountain to be bullied or belittled because I'm a woman, or people don't think I'm capable because I'm a woman. I've earned my space here. I haven't just come to the mountain, paid my money and think I'm going to summit. You know, I'm living this experience and have the experience to be independent. And I feel, reflecting on what happened at school and on the Everest experience and certain experiences since then in my adulthood, of when you feel that sort of bullying and belittling is there, is a lot of it is not about you as a person, but about other people's insecurities. It's just really unfair, and for it to be taken out on other people. And a lot of it is insecurities. It's like their own anxieties, and it's projected in a certain way. And it just, if you happen to be the target, how bad is that?
So then, where does your life go from? So I guess that late teenage years, thinking you're going to have the typical perfect farmer life.
Yeah, so I did. I went and worked with horses, and I went to New Zealand. So when I left school, I had set up going to college, agricultural college, Warwick Agricultural College, and I was going to do a diploma in horse management, and then, go and run yards or what have you. But before you go and do your college, we had to do a year out practical. So I left school and I went to a yard in the New Forest, run by an Olympic dressage rider, and she had a big stud, and it was amazing, Cathiston stud. I absolutely loved it there. And I loved it so much, I didn't want to leave, and I didn't want to go to college because I was loving learning in that environment without the academic side of stuff. I was learning on the job. So I remember having a chat with Jenny Lawson-Clark, who owned the place, and saying, is there any chance that I can stay on for another year and sort of work here? And then, so she got my parents in and said, this is what we're thinking. And I remember my parents being really disappointed because I was going to go to college and I was going to get a diploma and I was going to do all this. And Jenny was like, she's really good at what she does, so allow us to train her more here and she'll learn just as much here as she would have done in college. So my parents agreed, and I stayed on for another year and I loved it. And I then went to New Zealand and worked with horses in New Zealand, which was amazing. But I arrived in New Zealand to work for this family. And 5 days after I arrived, the husband of the family went into prison for tax fraud. And then the next day arrives this brand new Mercedes 6-berth horse box. And they were like, well, you need to get your HGV license now. I was 19 to drive this thing. I was like, wow. And I'd driven big tractors and, we used to drive big tractors and dumper trucks and all sorts. So I was like, okay, that's cool. I can do that. So there I was, got my HGV license in New Zealand and was driving this sort of massive, it was amazing. And I stayed there for 3 or 4 months, and I was offered another job with an Olympic rider up in the north of the North Island. Stayed for another 3 months, and then the season ended, so I came home and I worked in various different yards. And I think towards my mid-20s, I was getting to the stage where the dream and the reality were sort of separating. And what do I actually want to do with my life? And I was going out with a farrier at the time. And so we moved in together, and I left horses and went to work in retail because I just needed to get another job. And then I found out he was cheating on me, which in hindsight actually sent me, and it's funny how these little things in life at the time is just the hell on earth. And when you look back on them, it's like, so that was the purpose of that. That's what that taught me. And I think that's where reflection's really important. And it's like, right, that's happened in life. Now what? What does it mean? How do I deal with it? But when you're in your mid-20s, I didn't have the emotional capacity to deal with it. I was just angry. It's like, because the thought for the rest of my life had gone out the window. I was single, I was living in a bedsit in Aylesbury. I was in a profession that I didn't want to be in. I'm like, now what? I was like, okay, so I can either let this drag me down, or I can actually work really hard and work my way out of this situation. So, and that's what I did. And I got in with a really good crowd. So when I started working at the department store, my line manager is now my best friend, and we've known each other for 30 years. We've got a great history. And I sort of was swept along by this brilliant crowd of people. And that's where your vibe attracts your tribe. Mm-hmm. That's a real, I love that saying. Because I loved their vibe and I wanted to be part of that. So I then worked my way up through management in a few other industries. And in 2003, I was bored at work one Friday afternoon. We used to call it playing post offices. So sort of just shuffling paper around, which is, it's not great to a post office, but that's what we called it. And there was an advert. This was the very early days of Google and Yahoo. And this advert popped up on my desktop with a parachute jump for charity. And at the time I was very unadventurous, or I thought I was. And I was living what I thought was a very mediocre life, very different to where I thought I would be at that point. So I was in my early 30s, I was single, I had my own house and I had 2 dogs, but the being single part was a bit of an issue with me. I wasn't very successful in relationships. And I was fearful of heights. I used to sort of say, I'm going to go and do this course, or I'm going to go on holiday in this place, and then actually spend my time at home doing up house or what have you, instead of getting out in the world and doing stuff. So when this parachute jump popped up, I was like, oh, okay, right, I'll do that. I'll throw myself out of a plane, thinking that it's going to cure my fear of heights. It could have gone either way. And it was for Asthma UK, and a few of my friends had quite severe asthma. So I was like, that's a nice charity, a nice cause to support. And a friend of mine who worked with me at the same company, I told her about it. She was like, brilliant, I'll take you to the jump site, just in case you can't drive home. I was like, oh, okay, so what's going to happen? She said, well, you never know, you might be too excited to get there or what have you. And I didn't realise at the time she actually meant, because I know you're not going to go.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so Caroline knew that I would come up with an excuse not to go and do the parachute jump. Even if it was a lovely fine day, it's like I had a migraine, or I just something wrong with the dogs or something, I would come up with an excuse not to go. So she picked me up and took me to the jump site, and I did the jump, scared the living daylights out of me. I think I gobbed all over my instructor. I came out the aircraft, and I was just like paralyzed with fear. And you're supposed to, as soon as you come out, you're supposed to open your arms, and I was like, and he had to physically like unclasp me. And I didn't get that rush of, I'd love to go do it again. I got that I'm really glad I've done it, and that's it, thanks very much. And then I thought, that's it, so I've done my adventurous thing. And Caroline was like, I wonder what's next. I'm like, no, that's it, I'm quite happy with that. And then about a month later, Asthma UK charities send you the next thing. Yeah. The jump was to get you into it. Now what? And it was they sent me a flyer for a bike ride in Peru 10 months later with a company called Discover Adventure, who are based in just outside Salisbury. And so I took it to work, and it was on my desk, and Caroline saw it, and she was like, brilliant, what's next? And I came up with this whole list of excuses of reasons in my head of why not to do it. Didn't have a bike, I wasn't very fit, it was a lot of money, didn't have the deposit. Why would I want to go and cycle at altitude? And actually my main reason is I didn't have the deposit. So she said, so that's cool, I'll pay it for you, and then you can pay me back in instalments. I was like, oh.
Damn it.
Right, okay. And now when I tell the story and I talk to people about that start in adventure, she was my champion. She knew that I had more in me. And it was only a couple of years ago when I questioned her on why she did that, why she took me to the jump site. And she said, we all knew you were awesome. We all knew you were capable. You just needed to quit the excuses and try. I was like, harsh but fair. Harsh but fair. And so when I am working with people, I'm around friends and they're coming up with these barriers, or they're unsure, because usually it's fear of failure or even fear of succeeding. And I'm like, right, let's work out how this can happen, rather than saying to people, well, you can never do that, because I've had that so much, and it's like, why are you doing that? Even on my way up to Everest base camp, when I was going to climb it, a guy said to me, do you think you'll make it? So I have to believe I'm going to make it. And that's your insecurities talking then, not mine. And I wasn't there arrogant and going, of course I am. You know, why wouldn't I? It was like, yeah, I will. It's a belief, yeah. You have to live that belief. And not arrogantly. We were talking about earlier about authenticity. It's like, I've earned my right to be here. I've done all the right things to be here. I have the experience. It's my mind that's going to stop me rather than anything else. And I remember when I started training for the bike ride in Peru. So I think I signed up in the August 2003, and we were going out, or April 2004. And I went to a local gym and had the induction, and the guy said, what is it you're training for? I said, well, I'm going to cycle 500 kilometers in Peru. And he said, oh, you'll never do that. I was like, wow, okay. And it didn't give me a fire in the belly to go, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm like, I'm going to prove myself right. Because then I own it, rather than giving that ownership to somebody else. It's like, I need to own this. And Discover Adventure send you a really good training program, and I'm like, I will stick to this to the letter. And a friend they lent me a really good bike, and I learned how to ride a bike properly. And that first expedition, that first challenge, you know, I wore pants underneath my cycling shorts, which is a definite no-no. I wore cotton t-shirts. I didn't have the right shoe, you know, all of the stuff. I learned so much on that expedition, and the leaders were so brilliant and so encouraging. And knew when to do the tough love, or to when to have a laugh with you, and all of this. I'm like, God, it's so cool. But I never knew then that it was a job that you could do, because I'd never been in that world. So I never realised that it was a career, or you could combine it with having what a lot of people call, and I'm doing bunny ears here, a proper job, because it is a proper job. So yeah, it was amazing.
How does your life go from retail to proper job? This like, where's that transition point? So
it was after the Peru bike ride. So I just moved jobs to work at Business Link, which was a government-funded business support organisation. And I was starting to do, once I did Peru, you either love it or hate it, and I loved it. So I was like, oh, what's next? Yeah, okay. So I was on the Discover Adventure website going, I wonder what's next. So I signed up for a bike ride in New Zealand for the Anthony Trust, and then I did another one in Cuba. And it was in Cuba I was talking to the leader, a lovely lady called Jackie Gibb, who's also doctor, GP. Like, how do you get into it? And I now get that asked, like, how did you get into it? And she said, well, you know, you can do this in your holidays from work. So you can combine having a well-paid job and doing this, because leading an adventure doesn't pay brilliantly. So I sent my CV in to Discover Adventure, and they took me on as crew, and then I started leading for them, and then they offered me a job in the office. So in 2008, I moved from a well-paid job up in Milton Keynes, with all the things that, as a society, I think we expect success to look like. So I was earning decent money. I had my own house. I had a fancy car. No, I wasn't married with kids, which is another part of success. More bunny ears. But I wasn't happy. I wasn't fulfilled. And you only really get one shot at this life. We're only here once. So why am I doing stuff that actually is not making my heart sing? So I was in economic development, which wasn't really lighting my fire. So they offered me a job in the office, but it was going to be halving my salary. I eventually sold my house and moved into a rented property down in Salisbury. Got rid of the fancy car, bought a banger, complete change of life. And that was the beginning of 2008. And I worked in the office for 2 years, running the open challenges, which grew, doubled in size. And I was leading a lot of trips and doing lots of recce's and learning on the job inside and out of the office. And at the end of 2009, the office job was getting too busy for me to be away leading trips for DA. So I was either going to be in the office and only do 2 or 3 trips a year, or I was going to leave and go freelance. And I said to Jonathan Bryan, who owns the company, I was like, I need to see where this is going to take me. So I left at the beginning of 2010 and never expected anything that's happened since. I was like, I'll just see what happens. Because I knew I was employable, and that's not saying it arrogantly, but I knew I could go and get another job. I'd built up a lot of experience in different industries with leadership and logistics and management and all that sort of stuff. So I was like, I'll see where this goes. And yeah, it's gone.
Yeah, 14 years later, and it's still...
Yeah, and so I started outdoor instructing, and I took have my mountain leader qualification, and was working with various companies doing Duke of Edinburgh Awards, and also leading a lot for Discover Adventure. I started leading schools expeditions for True Adventure, and you sort of get sucked into this world, and it's like, now where does it take me? And it was really because I was about to turn 40, and I wanted to do something for my 40th in 2011. I'm like, what can I do? And I wanted to go back to the horsey background of, it was all a bit romantic really, go and ride horses on a ranch in Wyoming or something like that. And I couldn't find anything that fitted in with when I was my busy periods in work and the quiet times. And I was working with, I co-piloted a Everest base camp trip with a guy called Rolf Oostra, who had just set up his own company. We were working for Discover Adventure, but the next year they were running 360 expeditions, were running an expedition to Mirror Peak, which is just under 6,500 meters in Nepal. I was like, so that would be good. That would get me above Kilimanjaro, which I'd led a few times, and give me an understanding of what it's like to be on crampons and with ice axe for safety rather than technicality, and be on a 3-week expedition. So I went and did that, and I was still very much an excuses person. What's next off? Well, I couldn't do this because of X, Y, Z. And it was fear. It was fear of pushing myself, I think, because I've been told so often that I was not capable of stuff that you believe it. And actually I'm like, well, I really need to change this narrative. And yeah, so I went and did Mirror Peak, and we didn't summit because the weather conditions were so bad and there was a big crevasse blocking our route. So I think we reached about 200 metres below the summit. But for me, I'd summited. I'd reached a personal summit, which I'd never been there before. I learned so much on the expedition from a leadership perspective. Because I remember Rolf saying to me when we were leading Everest Base Camp, got to the first big suspension bridge, and it's across this massive gorge. And I was waiting at the back to see if there was anyone who was more scared than me so I could help them across. And Rolf comes up, and somebody took a photo of it, and I can remember the conversation really clearly. He was like, what are you doing? It's like, get yourself across the bridge. I'm like, just waiting to see. He was like, Joe, if you mother people here, and this is like an hour into the first day, they're not going to be able to deal with it higher up. They need to be doing this themselves. I was like, damn. Now I've got to do it myself. So I got across the bridge, and that taught me an awful lot about a different style of leadership, because I tried to be everybody's friend on previous expeditions, and it just doesn't work. That's not your job. Your job is not to be camp comedian or everybody's best mate. Your job is to give people the agency to do things safely and give them the instruction and the courage to succeed, rather than, you know, we're all here having a great time. And that taught me quite a lot. So when we were on Mirror Peak and going through tough times, it's like, right, I need to draw on that. I need to bring that tool out of the toolbox and use it. And then after that, there was an opportunity to go on an expedition to Summit Aconcagua. So 6 months later. And I could afford this because my uncle had died the year before, bless his soul, and had left me a little bit of money, just enough, not that he knew it, but just enough to go and do those 2 expeditions. And that's where in life these sliding door moments. So if I didn't have that money, I would never have done Mirror Peak.
Yeah.
And certainly not Aconcagua. So where would I be now? I'd be like quite interested to roll back the time. So we went and did Aconcagua and we did Summit, and it was hard. My gosh, that was hard.
Where is that?
So Aconcagua is in South America, in Argentina.
Okay.
And it's one of the 7 summits, so the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents. So Aconcagua is the highest mountain in South America, 6,962 meters. So it's high. So you've got 40% oxygen, so 60% less oxygen at the summit than you would have where we're sat now. And it's you carry everything. It's a hard slog. It's not technical, the route that we did, but it's a hard slog. And I learned so much about my own resilience and about my own capabilities. And I remember before I led another Everest base camp in the October, we went in December, and in the October, and I remember, I think I was going up the Khumbu Valley and Rolf was coming down with his group, and we sort of crossed paths like you do in that environment. And he was like, oh, you know, really looking forward to Aconcagua. We have an expedition to Manaslu in a couple of years' time, and, you know, after we've done Aconcagua, that'd be a good next thing and it would be great on your CV. I'm like, let me get Aco sorted first. And where is Manaslu and what is it? And it's an 8,000 metre peak. I was like, oh, that's quite a step up. But actually, from Aconcagua, which is just below 7, it is a big step up. You know, you're going into the death zone and there's crevasses and it's a whole different environment. And Monty's just had a shake. And so, yeah, that was, and I was still coming up with excuses of how not to do it, how to back out. And then remembered sort of, if I want to go and achieve these things, and if I'm trying to encourage my clients to go and do it, why am I not believing that myself? Exactly. So I was like, right, time to stop I can't do it, and actually just get on and suck it up and go and do it. Yeah. There, Monty, come and lie down. It'll make you a noise. So after Aconcagua, when did we go to Manaslu? September 2013. And that was a whole different level of tough. We reached 7,500 meters without oxygen, which is just insane and hard. And carrying all our kit, we were working with amazing climbing Sherpas, and it was a great expedition. And we made it. 26th of September 2013 stood on what then we thought was the summit, because only in the last couple of years a drone was put up, and actually it's like 1 metre below the next
The next peak.
Next peak, which is still Manaslu, and that's now. So I think it's known as the North Peak or something. I mean, to me, I summited.
Yeah.
You know, I'm quite happy. It's a bit gutting to know that we weren't quite in the right place, but everybody was doing it. You know, that was it. So, but what a great expedition! I remember on that expedition. We knew the weather forecast was going to be challenging. So we were told, right, pack all your kit. We'd done our acclimatization rotation, so we were ready to go for the summit. Pack all your kit and then just come and chill for today. And we may be here all of today, tomorrow, or the next 10 days, and we'll wait for the weather window. Because it takes 3 or 4 days to get up there. So you need good weather to get back down. And I remember sitting in, the only magazine we had was Top Gear magazine, randomly, this base camp on Manaslu. So I was sitting in the mess tent reading that, and then Rolf comes in, he was like, right, we're going in an hour. And I remember guessing that sort of lurch of all these butterflies and thinking, my God, this is it. Because it didn't really feel real up until that point. It's right, this is it, we're going for the summit. And it took us 3 days to get up to the summit.
Do you feel like you're is it a life and death moment? Do you feel like you're in those, you're putting your life at risk kind of thing?
Yeah, 100%. Because if I had not listened to the advice of Rolf and the Sherpas, who live and breathe the mountains all the time, they really know their stuff. If I hadn't listened to them and I had made myself sick through altitude sickness or a bug or anything, then I've only got myself to blame. But I'm also putting other people at risk. And they knew that I was capable of doing it, so they very much left me alone, but they were there, you know, and the same with Rolf. He knew I was capable of climbing. And he was like, just go and do it. You know, we've got your back. So again, this is where the champion comes in. So we know you have the skills, we know you have the capability, the rest of it is down to you. Mm-hmm. And that's where mindset comes in, and that's where, you know, your mind can override, in a good way or a bad way, what your body is doing. And I remember on Manaslu, I was reading a book written by Rebecca Stevens, who's the first British woman to climb Everest in the mid-90s. And she came from a journalism background and sort of ended up climbing Everest. It sounds like she just got there. She had, again, like me, she gained the experience and gained the right to be there. And in her book, she says, your eyes are like a camera lens and you focus on what's important. So from the analogy of when you're crossing the ladders on a crevasse where there's 300, 400, 500 meters of oblivion below you, you know, the crevasses are sort of big fissures on a glacier, which is a river of ice going over rock underneath. So as it comes down the mountain, these sort of chasms open up. And if you fall down one, it's not going to be a pretty sight, and who knows what can happen. And when you're climbing up a mountain that has glaciers, particularly in Nepal and particularly in that environment, the icefall doctors, the climbing Sherpas, put ladders across so that everybody has safe passage. So you're walking over essentially a B&Q metal ladder that is staked either end, and sometimes there's 2 or 3 ladders lashed together with static rope, so the non-stretchy stuff. And there's a couple of rope handrails, but rope is not a solid entity. So you clip into that and you walk across with crampons on across these ladders with a big hole underneath you. So when she was saying your eyes are like a camera lens and you focus on what's important, in that context she was meaning you can either focus on the big hole underneath and what it's going to be like if you fall down, or you focus on the rungs of the ladder and the fact that the Sherpas who have put the ladders in place also like living, and they do their job brilliantly, and it's very safe and secure. And that actually the only way I'm going to get to summit the mountain is by taking one step at a time across these ladders and getting to the other side. I'm like, I appreciate that analogy. And I use it often now. And when we were coming down Devil's Kitchen a few days ago with the students in North Wales, I was using that analogy to them. It's like, you can either, if you're a bit nervous, either look at sort of, wow, that's a long way down, or actually it's just my next footstep that counts. Yeah. And it's for life as well. You know, it's like, what is it I'm actually focusing on? What's the important thing at the moment? So going up through the icefall, which was short but quite fast moving for an icefall, things fell down regularly. So that really concentrates the mind. You know, I do not want to get squished here. And it was a really, you know, when we arrived at Camp 3, 7,500 meters, it was like, right, we have now 600 and something meters to get to the summit, and you kind of go across a big plateau and then up a bit, and there's another plateau and up a bit. And I remember 3 o'clock in the morning, because we'd slept without oxygen as well for acclimatization, and then 3 o'clock in the morning, it's really, really cold, you know, well into the minuses. And I had a bit of nerves, and I put my oxygen mask on, and we practiced down at base camp, and I sort of had this thing in my head. It's like, I can't have anything over my face because I'm going to feel claustrophobic. And then I was like, I have to reframe this. I have to make friends with this. And I'm like, okay, so the mask is giving me life. The oxygen is ensuring that my hands and toes stay warm. And it doesn't give you a huge amount more acclimatization, but it definitely helps. Because above 8,000 meters, you're in the death zone, where life is not sustainable for a very long time unless you have oxygen on. And there's only, I think it's about less than 1% of climbers who have climbed any 8,000 meter peak have climbed them without oxygen. And in my head, they're superhuman. They're on a different zone. And I have so much respect for them. So yeah, I put the oxygen mask on, and turned it on, and I could feel my hands and feet warming up. It was amazing. I was like, oh, let's go. We're off. And I set off a little bit before Rolf and our other climber, Arthur, and I was walking on my own for quite a while. I was like, this is amazing. It was a beautiful night, stars were out, other climbers around, there weren't many of us on the mountain that time. And I'm like, yeah, this is cool. And I remember getting up, you get up to the summit ridge, and it's a very skinny ridge, and you get up to this little sort of platform, so it's like one up, one down. And Rolf went up first, summited first, Arthur went next, and I remember passing him to get to the summit, and he said, oh, be careful, Joe, it's not very stable up there. And I was like, oh my God, because it's a long way down either side. Yeah, and you're roped up, but if you fall, it's significant. I'm like, right, get that camera lens back out. And I think I'd belly flopped the summit and stood up, turned around, and then came back down. I'm like, right, I've done it. And yeah, I came back down, and our plan was to come back down to Camp 1, which was, I think, about 5,800 meters, so about the height of Kilimanjaro. So from 8,000 meters, come back down to Camp 1, spend the night there, and then go back to base camp another 1,000 or so plus meters down. And we knew the weather was coming in, so bad weather was coming in, and we got to Camp 1, and Rolf and the Sherpas had a chat, and they were like, right, we need to get to base camp And in essence, it was another 2 hours down. But for me, it was like a whole pain cave's worth of effort. And he was like, it's 2 hours out of the whole of your life. That's it. And we're back at the comfort of base camp, and we've got off the glacier, and we will beat the weather. So we carried on. Went down from 8,000 meters down to 4.5. Can't remember what base camp is about that. That's a long hike with all your gear and all the big boots and everything. And I remember that I hadn't done so you wear big insulated boots, and I hadn't done them up tight enough, and my toes were hitting the end of the boots all the way down. And I developed quite a bit of nerve damage from that, which has healed now. But I remember walking out the next day, and it took us 4 or 5 days to walk back to the roadhead, and every step was pain. It was like I was standing on nails every single step. And I remember coming back towards Aragat, which is the town where you get the bus, and we got our transport back out. And I remember this lady, a Nepali lady, walking beside me, and whenever I slowed down, she slowed down with me and then started speeding up again. And it was as if she was being my guardian angel and going, come on, you can do this. And I don't think she realised, I don't know if she realised, but I was in so much pain. And I was walking on my own. I'm like, she's just there. She's just like this amazing. And she got me back to town, and then she peeled off, and that was it. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Yeah, it was incredible. I loved that expedition. Because
how many expeditions, just out of curiosity, have you been on?
Nearly 100. Yeah, so I've led 37 Kilimanjaros. So yeah, like you do.
Yeah, that's all right.
Like you do, man. And it's weird, a lot of people go, isn't once enough? I'm like, it's my job.
But I bet it's a different experience every time you do it, right?
100%. Different groups, different seasons. I generally work with same crew, more or less. I learn something new about the mountain every time I go. I learn a bit of new Swahili, and I can speak better Swahili than I can Spanish or French, which is, I never thought that I'd be saying that. I never thought I'd be saying any of this, but I've been to Nepal so many times.
So when people talk about Joe Bradshaw and they say, Joe Bradshaw, she's the person who's done 6 out of the 7 highest mountains in the world.
Oh, no, not 6 out of the 7 highest.
Why
so
is
they're
it?
all 8,000 metre peaks. It's 6 of the 7. It's the highest mountain on each of the 7 continents.
Ah, that's it. Yes, 6 of the 7 highest
6 of the
peaks
7
on each continent.
on each continent. Yeah.
So, but you've done that you've not done. So you weren't consciously thinking, I'm going to tick that one. I'm going to do this one. I'm going to do that one. It's something that it sounds like, has just happened.
It's just So until Everest.
Right. Okay. So Everest, you kind of consciously decided.
After Everest, so going back a bit, after Manaslu, Everest then became an option. And it's funny, a lot of my friends were like, well, we knew you were going to do it. It was just kind of when rather than if. I was like...
I wish you told me that.
Yeah, exactly. I never knew that, and that's what my dad said. I remember when I broached the subjects, I'd just come back from doing back-to-back Kili, and I was having breakfast with my mum and dad because they looked after my dogs when I was away, and I said, I've been thinking about signing up to do, and this was the beginning of 2014, thinking about climbing Everest. And I remember my mum going quite grey and nearly falling off her chair, and my dad going, yeah, I thought so, one day. Yeah. I was like, oh, okay. And then in 2014, I met I didn't realise at the time, but there was a guy who did 2 bike rides with me with Discover Adventure for charity. And the second one was they were fundraising for a charity called Place to Be, children's mental health charity. And they work in schools, mainly primary schools in deprived areas. And I was learning a lot about the charity, and it kind of really sat well. And then he said, well, let's have a chat. So it was a friend of mine who was cycling with him as part of the crew who broached the subject of, oh, Joe's doing Everest and she has this really great story, and, you know, what do you reckon? And he was like, oh, that's actually fits with his values as well. And so he ended up being my sponsor. His company ended up being my sponsor. And I then raised funds so I could put all my effort to raising funds and awareness for the charity. So we went out in 2015, were at Camp 1 on the mountain when the earthquake struck, which was a very bad day in life. And we lost 3 of our team of Sherpas at base camp, because base camp was the most badly affected on Everest.
So you was at Camp
we were
1?
at Camp 1 above the Khumbu Icefall. So we were at about 6,100 metres. And base camp is at about 5,300 and something, depending on where you are.
So for anyone listening or watching this, essentially, 2015, Nepal had a huge earthquake, which...
So it was centred around the Gorkha region, west of Everest, down the Himalayas. 9,000 people lost their lives throughout Nepal. Hundreds of thousands were displaced. And 19 of those 9,000 lost their lives at base camp, Everest base camp.
And when had you been there previously? Were you there a few days before?
We'd been there that morning.
That morning?
Yeah, so we left Everest base camp about 3 or 4 a.m. that morning. Were given breakfast, tea and coffee, toast by our 2 of the Sherpas who lost, 2 of our team who lost their lives. And we'd just arrived at Camp 1. We had a really good run up through the Khumbu Icefall, which is a really gnarly section on Everest. I mean, it's all gnarly, but it's where, like on Manaslu, it's where things can fall down quite quickly. And so you kind of want cold, and you don't want any sun, because when the sun comes out, it melts ice and things fall down even quicker. And we had cold, a bit of snow, quite a lot of cloud. And we had I really enjoyed the time going up through the icefall. And Rolf and I arrived at Camp 1 about 11:20 or something. And we were just sorting out a tent. And I'd chucked, all our tents were already up because we were sharing them with another team who had gone up to Camp 2. And I remember I chucked my bag into a tent, and then when I got in it had a big dip in it. So, and that's not, when there's 2 of you sharing, you kind of want a flat platform. So we were then going to either move the tent or move to another tent. So I was just passing, I was in the tent, Rolf was in the porch, and I was passing our gear out to him. And then I remember we just suddenly stopped talking and looked at each other as if to go, what is that? And we heard a rumbling all around. And when you're mountaineering, especially in an environment where avalanches happen, you get used to hearing a crack or hearing the rumble and identifying where it is, working out how big it is, and do I need to get out quickly, or if it's actually going to be okay and miss you. But this was different because it was all coming, it sounded like it was coming from all around, which is just a bit weird. And then the glacier underneath us just dropped for a minute, and just sort of, the easiest way I can describe it is when you're in a lift with lots of people and the lift gets to your floor and then just goes down a bit more and comes back up. It was like that on steroids. It just went woof. And we were both like, whoa, that's not good. And I thought, because there was a dip in the tent, I thought there's a crevasse going to open up underneath us and I'm going to get sucked down into the crevasse in a tent wrapped up with Rolf, and that's not how I want to die.
Right, okay.
Definitely not. That's not how so we both shot out the tent, and the rumbling then resulted in avalanches, but we could feel, so when an avalanche happens, you get the whoosh of air ahead of any snow, ice, rocks, whatever is going to hit you. And we could feel it coming up through the Khumbu Icefall. So the Khumbu Icefall is in a valley with Nuptse, a 7,000 metre mountain on one side of the valley, and then the west shoulder of an Everest on the other. So you're sort of wedged in. And they avalanche quite regularly, and you sort of get used to that. But we could feel all this whoosh of air coming up through the icefall, and that was weird. And then we were avalanched, but not so bad that we were buried with just dustings of snow, and we could feel the glacier. It was shaking really violently underneath us, and I thought, well, maybe the glacier's just having a big slip, Didn't know if it was possible. And then it finished, and I don't know how long it went on for, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute. I have no idea. It felt like forever. And we were stood around, and there was me and Rolf, and there was another guide with his wife and their client, and we were like, what the hell's gone on? And then the radio cracked into action, and it was Henry, our base camp manager, saying, guys, are you okay? There's been a massive avalanche at base camp, and 3 of our team were missing. And what happened was, when the earthquake struck, when the earthquake struck, it had shaken loose a lot of snow, ice and rock from a mountain range behind Everest Base Camp, which is usually really safe. So you have a mountain called Pumori, and then there's a ridge line and another mountain called Lingtran, and they sort of shield base camp at the end of the valley. And then, so that's basically released a load of tons and tons of rock, ice and snow, and it had come down, and there used to be a gully in between that range of mountains and base camp, which is on a glacier. So I'm being very visual with my hands. So those that are listening, so think of a gully, and then there's a bit of a sort of mound where the big glacier is, and it has hit the bottom of the gully and then shot across base camp. And base camp is about a 2 kilometre stretch of the glacier at the end of the valley, where it's a colourful, beautiful place to be during the climbing season, because there's all these tents and prayer flags and chortens, which are the religious mounds where all the pujas, the religious ceremonies are done. It's just such a
spiritual place.
Right? It's just amazing. And all of this avalanche debris had hit the middle third of base camp, all the tents there, and our camp was in the middle of the middle third. So it's basically wiped out a whole section of base camp. And with it, 3 of our team and 16 other amazing humans at base camp. And so Henry was like, 3 of our guys are missing. Are you guys okay? And we were like, what on earth has just happened? I don't think anybody had really computed that it was an earthquake.
Yeah, or the magnitude of that earthquake.
Or the magnitude of it, or where it was.
Yeah.
How far it reached. So we were then stuck at Camp 1 for 2 days. So immediately helicopters went into action and were extracting the dead and injured. There was a huge amount of injuries at base camps. They were trying to get, and also up the valley, trying to get them back to Kathmandu, or even down to Ferrochet, which has a sort of field hospital. And so we were stuck at Camp 1 for 2 days. And the main issue for us, we had enough food, but you need gas. So it was like, we were sort of doing a bit of an inventory of how many, because there was about 80 climbers at Camp 1 and another 100 that had gone up to Camp 2 that day. So food-wise we'd be fine, but if you can't melt water, you can't eat, because it's all dehydrated food.
Right.
So, and the only way to get down would be helicopter, because the earthquake had damaged the ladders and the ropes.
I assume you couldn't go up, because that would have happened as well.
Well, no, actually up was not too badly damaged. But there were no ropes. So the season was over, full stop. All of the resources from any climbers or anybody with medical knowledge was get to help the dead and injured. Amazingly, nobody was injured at Camp 1 or Camp 2, or those that were coming out of the icefall towards Camp 1. And usually it's the icefall where it's sort of fairly gnarly. The year before, in 2014, 16 climbing Sherpas had lost their lives due to an avalanche that happened. They were all in a particular spot in the icefall, and Serac, a big sort of tower of ice, had come down and. So
I assume when this happens, going up to summit is done. Not a single person is thinking.
Well, interestingly, I heard from. Hey, Monty, don't do that. So all of the tents are sort of in rows, sort of on the ridges of snow and ice, and then there's usually crevasses in between, and then you have another range of row of tents. And I heard across a guy going, "So is that it? Is our climb off?" And I hadn't even thought at that point we were going to be able to go higher. And I think he was sort of going, "Well, maybe." And the team was like, "Yeah, we're not going any higher," because the ropes hadn't been put up to summit. There was no infrastructure left for us to go up. We didn't know what was going on at Camp 2. So Camp 2 is a bit like base camp, a more basic version of base camp, where there's cook tents set up. It's a sort of transient base camp, but we didn't know what state that was in. Yeah, the season was over, and so we spent 2 days up at Camp 1, and then were helicoptered back down to base camp. And I remember getting into the helicopter. It was 2 people per helicopter. The helicopter was stripped out. There was the pilot who was on oxygen, and we were basically sat on the floor, because when the higher you go, the lower the air pressure, and helicopters need air pressure to be able to operate. So the more load you have, the harder it is. Yeah. So it's 200 kilos payload, which includes us, and we had a rucksack each, and we took a tent down. And I remember leaving, so we took off and went down the icefall, and both Rolf and I were looking out, and it was just like a disaster zone. You couldn't really make out the route down. And I remember a pilot turning around and giving me the thumbs up, and I'm like, "Eyes on the road, dude. Eyes on the road." And it took us 6-7 hours to climb up and 2.5 minutes to get down. It was the best 2.5 minutes. Well, it's because Everest has been such an important part of the journey. It is a chapter in my life. It's not the whole story, because it's enabled me to do things afterwards, which I never expected to do. So during the earthquake, when you're in that zone, and we were being helicoptered back, we were told that Everest had been destroyed and it was flattened, and Everest Base Camp was flattened, and we landed at the lower edge of Everest Base Camp. All the tents had set up, and all the tents were still up, and Rolf and I were like, "This is weird." Well, I don't know what Rolf was thinking, but I thought this is strange. And we were pulled out of the helicopter by an American guide who clearly saw the look of confusion on my face, and he was like, "Right, we weren't affected, but you were." They knew where our camp was. He was like, "So when you start walking back up to your camp, just kind of brace yourself, because it doesn't look like where we are now." So we then started walking up to what was our base camp, and it was like walking into a film set of a disaster movie. But knowing this was real life, it wasn't a movie where somebody could go cut, reset. It was like, this is real life. And we knew 19 people had died. 3 of our team included, who we'd said goodbye to 2 days ago. That morning, one was due to come up. He was our Camp 2 cook, chef, who'd spent the last 20 years on Everest, and he lost his life on Everest. And we spent 2 days at Everest Base Camp, helping to clean up and sort of just regaining our thoughts and digging for kit, because I knew my technical equipment, so my phone, and didn't have much there, was buried somewhere. And I didn't want my phone back because it's a nice piece of tech. I wanted it back so I could speak to my mum. And had already spoken, my mum and dad already knew about it as soon as the earthquake happened. And we had a really fantastic guy called Tom Martison, who was reporting on behalf of the BBC. He was reporting on the Gurkhas doing their climb. So he then went into news mode, and I was like, I do not want my mum and dad seeing what's happened on the TV. So I grabbed our sat phone when we were at Camp 1 just after the earthquake and shoved it in Rolf's hands and said, please phone Marnie, his wife, and please get her to phone my parents on their mobile because they were away, and just let them know we're fine. So Marnie did. Just as my mum was seeing, she'd turned on the TV where they were in Belgium and the ticket stuff at the bottom of the screen going earthquake in Pokhara, and she was like, that's fine, they're not in Pokhara. And then the phone goes and that they were home straight away. So, but for us, we were living it on a second by second basis. And I think it's so much harder when you're trying to gain information when you're not there. Because I know that so much of the information that's given out by news outlets is glorified and incorrect. And so when we got back to base camp, I borrowed somebody's phone and I rang Mum and I told her what actually was happening and that we were fine. And yes, it was scary. We were absolutely fine. And what the plan was next. And then Rolf and I were digging for a couple of days for our kit. And in the afternoon of when we were sort of finishing digging, he was like, right, enough's enough. Let's stop now. And I dug down and I found my iPhone. I found my mobile phone, amazingly, under a metre of snow and ice, and I put it in the sun to warm up, switched it on, and all these messages pinged through. And I remember sitting in my tent, and sort of the phone was on my boot, trying to get a better signal, and I spoke to Mum via text message, and then I messaged my sponsor and said, sorry, we didn't quite make it, but we are alive, because his parting comment to me was, come back alive. Like, ooh. And so we were having this sort of text message conversation and he said, would you go back? And I messaged back, yeah, because it wasn't anything that we had done to stop our climb. We hadn't been stupid, we hadn't been injured by...
It was a natural...
It was just a natural... Mother Nature was having a really bad day. And he said, great, I'll sponsor you to go back. And to be given one chance to go and climb Everest through sponsorship and raising money for the charity, to then be able to go back the next year and do it again was a gift. I had to, I couldn't say no. And a lot of my friends had said, we would understand if you said no. And I remember after he sent me this text message, I immediately, because I shouted out to Rolf, my God, we're coming back. And I knew that if my mum heard that from any other outlet, she'd be really angry with me. So I texted her straight away saying, oh, by the way, we're coming back next year. And I got a one word reply of great. And I knew it wasn't woohoo. It was a, oh. So we went back the next year, and it was psychologically, I found it really tough from being back in the same place where the nastiness happened, and I needed to reframe and make friends with the mountain again. And it was, I found that there was a different vibe that year, and there was some unpleasant behaviour, and I found it really difficult. And I came, despite summiting and achieving this dream, I came home really angry, and I allowed myself to sit in the zone of being a victim of other people rather than going, doesn't matter, whatever was going on in their lives at that point, they were taking out of me, nasty as it was, fine, just park it and move on. And I did get over that. And the guy who was particularly targeted sent me a Facebook message quite a while afterwards saying, I'm really sorry about my behaviour, but it was because of someone else. And I'm like, you've not apologised. You're blaming it on someone else. Everything before the but is bullshit. Mm-hmm. I learned last year on an NLP course. It's a great saying. And every time someone says but now, I'm like, is that a genuine but, or is that bit doesn't matter? And in that context, I'm really sorry I behaved like that, but it was that person's fault. I'm like, you're still not owning why you were like that. Mm-hmm. Own it, own up, own it, apologise, authentically, genuinely, move on. So yeah, it was an interesting lesson in human psychology, and leading and being with people in really extreme environments brings out character traits that maybe they're not aware of. And I can't, I've been in situations where fear has got the better of me, and I've probably said things that I didn't mean, I know I didn't mean, or acted in ways. It's how often you do it and what you then do to put it right. Yeah. And it's not an excuse, and I'm very mindful of it now, because it goes from that action, and then there's that void, that space to react. How are you then going to react?
So, Jo, where do we find you now? So we've gone through so much, and I feel like we could literally spend a whole month, and I'd love to go on our own little expedition doing this. Yeah. But where are you at right now?
Where am I now? So I've now completed 6 of the 7 summits. So after Everest came Elbrus in Russia, Europe, Vinson in Antarctica, and Denali in Alaska. Not quite in that order. And then so I have Carsten's Pyramid in Indonesia to complete in West Papua. The country was closed 24 hours before we were due to fly there in 2019 due to civil unrest, and has remained shut until this year. And I had a brief moment where I thought I was going to back in October and attempt to climb, but I had to postpone it until next year. The country is open, or will be open, for climbing again. Fingers crossed for them as well as much as us. I'm still leading expeditions, but very much a lower number, because I was starting not to enjoy it. And I've been through quite a journey with the menopause. So I'm 53 now, and my father passed away end of 2017. And I didn't realise at that time that my grief from losing him was also being exacerbated by perimenopause. So it just felt like it was elongating, and I'm still grieve for him. But I've learned to enjoy the moments you had, and not to think in the past too much, but celebrate what was been on. And I've been on quite been on quite a journey with the menopause, and how I felt I was completely lost and a friend of mine calls it a chaos, and it was like chaos. It was like being in a sort of tornado vortex. And it's only since I've started coming out of that I've realised just sort of how hard it was. So thank you to all my friends for sticking by me. And I realised in 2022 that I wasn't enjoying the expeditions as much. I wasn't recovering as quickly as I used to. And perhaps it was time to look at expanding my portfolio of work, and future-proofing myself, because I don't want to be doing multiple expeditions a year in my 60s, and that's the only earnings that I have. So I'm expanding my talks, and I do a lot more leadership development work now, and I'm not away as much, which is a joy. So I'm seeing more friends, and I'm not tired all the time, or tat as they call it in the medical profession. I'm not tired all the time, and I've sort of gained this new kindness to myself that I don't need to be living my life through other people's eyes. And it's interesting when people go, so what's your next adventure? And the beginning of last year, I was like, well, actually staying at home. That's my next adventure. That's my next big thing. It's like how I can stay at home and make it work for me. And I'm still on that journey. I think we are on that journey all the time. And it's sitting much more comfortably with me now. And I do miss expeditions. I'm going away in October to lead an expedition on Amadablam in Nepal, so 6,800 metres. And I have a couple of Kilimanjaros next year and an expedition in Nepal to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first woman to climb Everest, a Japanese lady called Junko Tabai, and the 10th anniversary of the earthquake. So I'm doing overseas expeditions because it's a big part of who I am.
But at your pace.
At my pace. At my pace. And doing things that I really want to do, either going back to somewhere I really love, like Tanzania and Nepal, going with people that I want to go with, that I choose to go with. And I've met some of my best friends through them being clients and then us becoming friends. But it's I want to now surround myself with that amount of people, or somewhere new that I haven't been. So the curiosity to explore and adventure elsewhere. So a friend of mine is just, we had a group, they went and climbed Tupacao this year. I was meant to be leading it, but a very dear friend of mine passed away. So I stayed at home and went to his funeral. And so it was just such a beautiful day. And we've still got the WhatsApp group, and a friend said, oh, well, let's go to Ireland next. So I was thinking on my way up here, well, actually, I'm selling my van, buying a new one, newer. So why don't Monty and I go on a road trip to Ireland in September? I was like, whoa, let's go and do some more adventures and see where that takes us. So so that's going to be my next, So, and I'm really excited about it. It's, I'm when I hit 50 3 years ago, it's like, wow, I've still got half my life to lead.
Yeah.
What can I do with it? And I think that's what the earthquake has given me, is this hunger not to miss opportunities. And we both know and love Dave and Emma Cornthwaite and the Say Yes More and the Yes Tribe. And as Dave says, very brilliant, it's not say yes to everything. It's say yes to more things in life that make your heart sing or scare you. Because a little bit of fear is a good thing.
Or sometimes what he says is the one with the best story as well.
Yeah, exactly. As Baz Luhrmann says in his song Sunscreen, do something every day that scares you. Yeah.
I love that.
And it might be for somebody just simply going out the house, but to them it's not just simply going out the house, it's quite a big adventure.
Something for themselves.
So whatever that is, to expand your comfort zones, and then outside of that, where does that lead you? So it's good.
So Jo,
yes.
I want to say thank you first and foremost.
Pleasure.
And it's not even for sharing your story with us or anything like that, it's for being here. Like literally, there's so many reasons for you not to be here in terms of the challenges that life has thrown at you, and you can go from childhood all the way to now. Thank you for being courageous and vulnerable as well, and sharing your story. How do people find out about you? Do you have a website, social media? We'll put it all into the show notes anyway.
Brilliant, thank you. So yes, I have a website, jobradshaw.co.uk. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. It's Jo Bradshaw, and there's links from my website and LinkedIn as well. And I blog fair amounts, so I'm blogging quite a bit about my sort of current evolution and the steps I put in place last year to sort of move forward into the second half of my life, I guess. My half-time oranges. Okay.
So this brings us to the question answer. Now, the quick fire questions.
Okay.
So I've got questions.
Yep.
You answer it and you don't have to explain anything, and it's quick fire because the next one's going to be coming.
Okay. Right.
Ready?
Go.
Life is about
curiosity.
Adventures can
Lead you anywhere.
True education
Is living an authentic life.
A true community does
Support each other.
Oh, I love this. So good. Family is
Love.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's so cool, actually. If you was to give advice to your 25-year-old self, that advice would be?
Feel the fear and do it anyway.
If you could go back to an age that you've been in your lifetime so far, what age would that be?
God, good question. Actually, around 23, 25, when I was going out of horses into a world I didn't know. Yeah.
If there was a Joe Bradshaw government rule and it was your rule and everyone had to listen to it and abide by it, what would that rule be?
Treat each other with respect and be kind to everyone and everything, environmentally and people and animals, and be kind, because we can live on this planet without fighting each other. And I wish we could. Yeah.
Okay. How much of where you are right now is due to luck, and how much of it is due to hard work?
A lot more due to hard work. Because I don't believe in luck. I believe in good fortune. I believe that luck sometimes is, like when people say you're so lucky to be doing what you're doing, it's like hard work has got me here. Yes, sometimes being in the right place and being with the right people has enabled that, but it's then my choice at that moment in time whether to take that risk or to not.
Yeah.
So it's a lot sliding doors. So yeah, hard work.
My final two questions,
Yes.
Joe, that I've asked all 161, I think, ambassadors so far.
Wow.
So, Joe Bradshaw, what is your definition of the word inspire?
Oh God, that's a really good question. I don't think I've been asked that before. To give people the agency and the belief that they can do more if they wish to as well.
Love that.
I think, yeah.
And my final question that I've asked every Tales to Inspire ambassador is, if you were to live your fullest life, your life 100 years old, you've reached that golden age and you're buzzing, what's the greatest achievement that you want to have achieved during your lifetime?
Gosh, I having as little environmental impact as I can, and knowing that I haven't wasted a day of thinking just what's the point? Because I know in my former years I've like, what is the point? And I'm like, okay, so there is a point to everything that happens in your life, whether it's nice or not. It's how you act and react to that. And I think when I'm sitting in my rocking chair, I can go, I gave it my best shot and I did everything I could. And even if it's sometimes sitting on the sofa and resting for a day, because that's still actively being part of the world, it's like, how can I make the best out of this opportunity to be alive, because I nearly lost my life. And that is a real reminder that it can go. And having lost a dear friend this year who was too young to die and had so much more to give to this world and to his life and his family, it's like I owe it to myself to give it everything. So yeah.
Jo Bradshaw, thank you so much for being on the Tales to Inspire podcast.
Thank you for watching today's episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, then please leave a comment in the comment section below, and we cannot wait to see you for our next episode.